Hello, and welcome to the show Gold Squadron Gays. It's the podcast where two Star Wars loving gays break down each episode of their favorite Star Wars TV shows while also being gay as hell.
I'm your other host, Charles Rogers, and wow, those are some good Dooku episodes, huh?
Sure were.
Sure were. Surely I will have nothing but nice things to say about the remaining two episodes, which I'm sure will be just as good and interesting as the Dooku episodes were. Bradley, do you have anything before we get into Tales of the Jedi today? Because I got nothing. Bad Batch trailer came out, but we don't talk about... Reminder, we don't talk about those until our episode 0.
Gotcha. Which is coming up vaguely soon.
Vaguely soon, provided they do not fuck us on the release date again. Which...
Right. I think we're good now. I think we're solid.
I think we're solid. I think they're putting out trailers and things. I do genuinely think that the release date that they have now is going to be the release date. But we've only been waiting for it for what, a fucking year?
Right. So
for this season 2. It's been something insane. I'm sure we'll get to it in our episode 0, which will be, at some point. Well, today we are continuing our coverage of Tales of the Jedi. We are filling the time in between Andor and the Bad Batch just by doing little discussions on the episodes Tales of the Jedi. We've already done the first 4. Now we're on to episode 5. Bradley, you want to take us into episode 5, Tales of the Jedi?
Sure thing. So today we're talking about the episode Practice Makes Perfect. A Jedi Padawan is given a seemingly impossible exercise. Charles, what did you think about the second Ahsoka episode?
I noticed you didn't say, "Did you like this episode?" You've been phrasing it as, "Did you like this episode?" And
right
now it's, "What did you think?"
Right. I'm probably gonna do that for the next 2 episodes.
I mean, the underlying opinion that I'm going to have about both of these episodes is the animation is gorgeous, really fluid and dynamic. The lighting leaps and bounds from the days of early Clone Wars. Like, it's beautiful lighting. The lighting in the Jedi Temple training room, incredible. Unbelievably good. Voice acting, top tier as always. I just have one overarching problem with episode 5 specifically, and 6 will kind of share it, which is I don't know why this episode exists. Now, to clarify what I mean by that is I was approaching these episodes as being the untold stories of the Jedi in question. So Dooku, we got the visual media depiction of things we had not ever seen in visual media before, and it told us things about Dooku as a character that we did, as the audience, did not already know from watching the Clone Wars. And the first Ahsoka episode didn't really tell us anything about Ahsoka as a character, but it gave us important context to Ahsoka as a character. Practice makes perfect. The central arc of this episode is that Ahsoka is training with the Jedi, and Anakin thinks that's kind of dumb. So Anakin goes and does his own thing with her training and trains her through the Clone Wars, and ultimately that's part of how she's able to survive Order 66, right? That's the general thesis of this episode. The thing with that is that's the plot of the Clone Wars show. If you've watched the Clone Wars and then you watch this, it's not really providing any addition. The only new information it's giving is there was some training that occurred at some point.
Right.
But the overarching theme, which is Anakin's training saved Ahsoka's life, that's the plot of the 7 seasons of the Clone Wars. And before people are like, "Oh, you can't assume people have watched the Clone Wars." This is a spinoff series of Clone Wars. The only people who are going to be watching Tales of the Jedi are going to be people who've already watched the Clone Wars. I really can't see a scenario where somebody would just put on Tales of the Jedi before they'd ever watched the Clone Wars. That's my overarching issue with this episode, is I'm looking at it, I'm like, this is beautiful, this is great, I love the little short film about Ahsoka, but it doesn't tell me anything new about her, doesn't tell me anything new about her relationship with Anakin. It doesn't tell me anything new about her relationship with clones. It's not providing me anything that I didn't already know. I will say it is nice to see Ahsoka out of the really fucking awful outfit she was in the first 2 seasons of the Clone Wars and into something much better designed. So thank you, people who are not George Lucas, for making that decision. But overall, yeah, it was fine. It just didn't tell me anything I didn't already know. What about you, Bradley? What did you think of this episode?
So either shockingly or not shockingly to you, this was my least favorite of the Ahsoka episodes.
This doesn't really surprise me. Also, you and I have discussed these episodes off mic before.
Right. Like you said, Other than just like, here's something she did off to the side that we kind of inferred that already happened anyway. It's like, why are we seeing this information? We don't need this information. It's kind of unnecessary. Like, yeah, of course she trained with Anakin. That's like a blanket statement. We don't need like their special training or what. I don't know. I just think it's kind of silly of an episode. But like you said, it's a beautiful episode. It's nice. I didn't love how I think one thing that Tales of the Jedi does. I mean, look, okay, we don't all need our hand being held the whole entire time to tell you when things are taking place in the timeline. However, if you're going to jump
Clearly, you have
around,
not been on Star Wars Twitter.
right,
They need their hands held constantly.
but like I don't know, this episode to me, it's like, unless you seriously just watch season 7 of the Clone Wars, like you need to be like told when things are taking place. I think it's the first bit is supposed to be like early on in the Clone Wars show, and then it randomly jumps to the end of Clone Wars show where she's with Rex, and then you're just like, what? I don't know what's happening. What's going on timeline wise? Like it was just like a lot for me.
Yeah, it felt like they were essentially like condensing the entire narrative arc for Ahsoka and Anakin down into one bite-sized portion, which I can respect. That's not a story that shouldn't be told in any form. My question, as far as like you're presenting this as the untold tales of the Jedi, filling in the details, and it really is just presenting a super fast version of Ahsoka's entire narrative arc throughout the entirety of the Clone Wars. And that was my principal issue with it. Was I watched it and I was like, yeah, okay, I kind of guessed all this was happening, but like it starts to get to the point where it feels like, oh, we need to get up and see Ahsoka making breakfast in the morning. We
Yeah.
need to see Ahsoka in the car for an hour on her commute to her Jedi office job or whatever. And I'm like, we really did. As much as I love Ahsoka Tano and I love seeing more stories with Ahsoka Tano in them, this one felt a lot like, okay, yeah, we sort of guessed that, she stops at the gas station on her way to the commute sometimes. We figured that kind of happened off screen. Like we don't necessarily need to see it. I feel like if you were going to tell a story about Ahsoka during the Clone Wars, and you could even tell a story about Ahsoka's relationship with someone else, right? But it shouldn't have been Anakin, and it shouldn't have
Right.
been it should have been something we hadn't seen before. There's a really great I think it's Forces of Destiny short, where I believe it is either Padme is teaching Ahsoka or Ahsoka's teaching Padme. I think Ahsoka's teaching Padme like some of the basics of space combat, and they get into like a space combat with some droids. It's a really sweet little episode, but like it's really great because we never really got to see Ahsoka and Padme interact in the mainline Clone Wars show, other than a couple of episodes. And so when we got that episode of I swear it was Forces of Destiny, where that happened, and they actually got a chance to have a little adventure together, that was really neat because it's something we hadn't seen before. So I almost prefer they would have taken the budget and the concept for this and done like an Ahsoka and Yularen story, or an Ahsoka and Padme story, or like an Ahsoka and Bail Organa story, which would have tied into the next episode, which we'll get to when we get to. Just Ahsoka during the Clone Wars with somebody who isn't Anakin, because we've already seen the relationship between Anakin and Ahsoka play out. We don't need more of it to reinforce that.
Right. Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think it could have, honestly, based on the next episode, it should have been a Padme centered episode. It should have been like, look, we know what her relationship is with Anakin Skywalker. Now let's see the other side of the coin of his life, which is the only other super important person to him besides Obi-Wan Kenobi, which was Padme. And so like, let's see that relationship.
Yeah, I would have loved, yeah, if they would have tied in some Anakin and Padme stuff too.
Yeah.
If it had been like a little bit of Padme and Anakin, but then the majority of the episode was like Ahsoka doing a thing, which we did get in Clone Wars. We got the Pursuit of Peace episode, I think, was the one where they have the peace conference and Ahsoka's guarding Padme. That was a really good episode. More of that, please.
Right, stuff like that, or basically, I think what you're asking Dave Filoni to do is a Jar Jar and Ahsoka episode. I think that's what you're really trying to say.
You know what? That would have been good. Like no joke. Well, because they did that with the season 6 episodes with Jar Jar and Mace Windu, and that made
Right.
those characters so interesting
So much
in
more
the
interesting. Yeah.
dynamic between them. Whereas, yeah, this short is just like, yeah, more Ahsoka and Anakin. And like the clones are in it, but the clones aren't really characters in it. They're more of training devices that Anakin is using to teach Ahsoka a lesson. Which, yeah, I mean, it's not got even that. You could even do like an Ahsoka and Jesse story, or Ahsoka do something like Ahsoka and a clone that is not Rex. Much as I love Rex, again, we've seen the relationship with Rex and Ahsoka play out. It was in the Clone Wars show, which
Right.
presumably you watched before you watched Tales of the Jedi. Otherwise, you're not going to understand what the fuck is going on in Tales of the Jedi. As far as things that were great about this episode, do you want to hear about our voice cast?
I would love to hear.
We have 4 people in this voicing the characters. Ashley Eckstein is back as Ahsoka Tano. Love that. And then they've got some people that definitely we've never heard of before to voice the other characters in this. Somebody named Matt Lanter is voicing Anakin Skywalker. I think he was on Beverly Hills 90210. I may have Googled shirtless photos of him in 2008, 2009 from Beverly Hills 90210. But he's also in Timeless. Oh, and he's in Star Wars: The Clone Wars, Star Wars Rebels, and the Lego Star Wars: The Skywalker Saga, as well as the Lego Star Wars Holiday Special and Lego Star Wars Summer Vacation as Anakin fucking Skywalker. One day, the bit of oh, you may have minorly heard of this person from other things. By the way, they were in Star Wars. One day that bit will get old for me, but it never does. But I swear I'll only do it once this episode. Obi-Wan Kenobi appears, voiced by James Arnold Taylor. He's been the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi. He's a fairly prolific voice actor. He's been in 304 acting credits. But the first thing that popped up is a photo from Kenobi. Was he in Kenobi? Because I don't recognize this. Oh, this is interesting. So James Arnold Taylor wasn't in like Obi-Wan Kenobi the series. He was in a fan film called Kenobi, a Star Wars story that came out in 2019. There's the
Okay.
confusion.
I was like very confused for a second. Yeah.
But yes, James Arnold Taylor has been Obi-Wan Kenobi in fucking everything animated forever since Star Wars The Clone Wars. Really impressive dude, actually. I saw like a video of him where he's talking about voice matching and he's switching back and forth between actors like Ewan McGregor and other actors he's voice matched for, which is quite impressive. Speaking of people who can switch back and forth between voices effortlessly, our final cast member playing Captain Rex and Jesse is, of course, D. Bradley Baker. You know who D. Bradley Baker is.
Absolutely. What's funny is literally just watched the first episode of Bad Batch again because I was trying to restart it before we start doing our coverage of it. And that leads to another random character that appears in this episode for no absolute reason whatsoever.
Yeah, Caleb Doom is here, which some interesting things with the Jedi scene. I don't know why
Yeah.
Obi-Wan Kenobi. So Obi-Wan Kenobi has the mullet again,
Right. Which implies
which
early.
okay, so it's kind of a little continuity snarl.
Yeah.
Not a big deal, but, and it may have to do with the 2008 animation, but this was pointed out. So in the novel Brotherhood, Obi-Wan grows his hair out longer. Like it's down to his shoulders, levels of long before he chops it all off. Which I think might be what they were going for here, but he has chopped all of it into the familiar haircut by the time of the Clone Wars movie, which takes place before this. So I don't know what's going on with Obi-Wan Kenobi's here. Also, Caleb Doom is here for some reason, which I don't know if this means he recognizes who Ahsoka is in Rebels and just never ever brought up that he knows who
Right.
Ahsoka is and has met her before. But I have a sneaking suspicion with some of the minor details in this episode that the story group was an asset that Dave Filoni didn't really use. Like the creators are not required to go to the story group to make sure all their continuity lines up and everything. It's just a resource they can use, and some creators use it more than others. And I feel like for some of the details like this that they didn't ask anybody,
Yeah.
which they're not the end of the world, and it's Dave Filoni, but there's some subtle clues that he didn't ask anybody, hey, what's Obi-Wan Kenobi's haircut look like at this point?
Well, it's almost like he was just like, okay, well, what models do we not have to recreate right now? And one of those models is for extras in the background, essentially, are Caleb and, his master.
Depa.
Right. I'm like, because they were just in Bad Batch. So, like, let's just reuse these models real quick in the background for like 5 seconds.
Oh, that also is a question because, like, according to the Kanan comics, I think Kanan gets taken as Depa's Padawan fairly late in the Clone Wars. I think it's within the last year. So, like, that's also a problem because is Caleb Doom her Padawan yet? A lot of the minor details that get thrown in that it's kind of like, oh, look at the thing that we know. It's also like, I don't know if that necessarily works.
And it's so weird because I just watched an interview with Dave Filoni where he's talking about filming Ahsoka and he's talking about, the cartoons. And he's like, well, if there's something in the cartoons I want to change, I can always go back and change it before you release it. But if you release live action like Ahsoka, I can't go back and change it and do stuff. So it's like, it's weird that like it got this far down the pipeline, all these different things, and he didn't take a second look at it and go, maybe that's not a great idea, or maybe I need to not put that in there.
Yeah, or like maybe, and I don't know how much of it necessarily is Dave Filoni because let me check here real quick. Because one thing that hasn't gotten mentioned as far as the directors of these episodes, we haven't mentioned this yet, but I am going to mention it now. Dave Filoni wrote all of these episodes, but he didn't direct any of them. And he talked about, this is kind of cool. He talked about it when he was doing the panel at Celebration. He said one thing he really, really wanted to do was give people who weren't as big into directing a foot in the door with these episodes. So I don't know whether or not it was Dave Filoni that made that call or whether or not Saul Ruiz, who is the person who directed this particular episode, maybe Saul Ruiz made those calls. I could not say for certain, and I don't like when people speculate too much about behind the scenes things.
Right.
But I will say I have a sneaking suspicion that Story Group, I know Pablo Hidalgo wasn't involved in making the series. I have a sneaking suspicion that Story Group wasn't as involved in this one, which is why some of the minor details are a little bit off. But I mean, if you're a visual media only kind of person, it is cool to see like Kanan Jarrus again, and it is cool to see Obi-Wan Kenobi's mullet hair. But if you're watching in chronological order, it's going to be a little bit confusing. Do you have any final thoughts on this episode, Bradley?
Yeah, I don't really have too much to say about it. I mean, like you said, I thought this was kind of a weird episode to do. Could have probably better been served of Ahsoka's story somewhere else. We could have just gotten literally any other person could have taught her this or something like that other than Anakin, because we already kind of know Anakin's role as her master and being unusual and unorthodox and whatever. And
well,
I don't know. I just don't think
I'll
we
break
need
my
this.
own rule and interrupt your final thoughts to disagree with you a bit. I don't think anyone but Anakin could have taught her this particular lesson. I don't think we necessarily needed to see this particular lesson taught, since it's just a truncated what he already taught her in Clone Wars.
Gotcha. I don't know. I mean, I just think this whole episode doesn't need to exist, I guess is my point. Like, there's no reason for it. So that's my final.
I agree, and I don't say that as like this is Star Wars I don't like, so it shouldn't exist, yada, yada. I mean, genuinely on a story level, I really don't think this is a story that needed to be told. I thought there were other Ahsoka stories set during the Clone Wars that could have been told instead using this budget. And this opportunity. Yeah, I mean, the episode's fine. I don't have anything objectionably wrong with it. It is a fun episode to watch. It's one of those fishbowl episodes that, oh, it's very pretty. I might put it on the TV with the sound off to have something playing while I work, because it's nice to look at. Like, the animation's great. The voice acting's great. It's just the very core of the story. I didn't really think we needed an episode on this. I really thought there are tons of Ahsoka stories that they could tell. I really didn't think it needed to be this one. There's nothing functionally wrong with it. I just think they should have written something else. Well, on that note, that's where we're going to end our coverage for today. And that's it. That's all the Tales of the Jedi episodes, right, Bradley?
One more left.
God fucking damn it. I didn't want to do this one, but okay. Join us next time for episode 6 of Tales of the Jedi, which I'm going to try to be as fair to as possible. We're going to see if I succeed after Bradley has ran the socials.
Thank you for listening to Gold Squadron Gaze. Did Charles fuck something up? Send us a message at goldsquadrongaze@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter at Gold Squad Gaze. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Gold Squadron Gaze. Subscribe to us on YouTube at Gold Squadron Gaze, where we post the podcast as well as exclusive content. Please join us next week and every week for more of Gold Squadron Gaze.